You know what exhausts you more than your actual problems? The stories you tell yourself about them. Right now, as you listen to this, there's a voice in your head narrating your life, criticizing, catastrophizing, replaying yesterday's failures and tomorrow's disasters. You think this voice is protecting you, keeping you realistic, preparing you for the worst. But what if I told you this inner narrator isn't your ally, it's your prison guard? For decades, I've watched people suffer not from their circumstances, but from the invisible tyranny of their own thoughts. The tragedy isn't that life is hard. The tragedy is that you're living inside a mental courtroom where you're simultaneously the defendant, the prosecutor, and the hanging judge, and the trial never ends. But here's what most people never discover. You don't have to win the trial. You just have to walk out of the courtroom. Let me share something that will disturb you. Most of your negative thoughts aren't even yours. They're echoes, recordings from childhood, playing on an endless loop. When you tell yourself, "I'm not good enough," that's not your voice. It's your father's impatience, your mother's anxiety, your teacher's dismissal, crystallized into a belief you now defend as truth. I've spent my life studying the unconscious mind, and here's what I discovered. The average person spends 80% of their mental energy fighting battles that ended 20 years ago. You're not thinking negatively about your life today. You're reliving yesterday's wounds and calling it preparation. The war is over, but you're still manning the trenches. A woman once came to my consulting room, convinced she was cursed with bad luck. Every morning, she'd wake up already defeated, her mind flooding with everything that could go wrong. "Dr. Freud," she said, "my thoughts attack me the moment I open my eyes." I asked her a simple question. "When did you first learn to think this way?" She went silent, then tears came. At 6 years old, her mother had told her, "Expect nothing, and you won't be disappointed." That single sentence had become her entire philosophy of life. She wasn't experiencing negative thinking, she was being obedient to an old command. For 30 years, she'd been a loyal soldier to a strategy that was supposed to protect her, but had actually imprisoned her. The moment she saw this, everything changed. Not because her circumstances improved, but because she finally understood. She wasn't broken. She was just following outdated instructions. Before we continue, if you're finding value in this conversation, I'd appreciate if you'd subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me what city and time zone you're watching from. I'm genuinely curious about who's out there listening to these ideas. Now, let me tell you what we're going to explore together in the next hour. I want to help you understand something that most people never grasp in their entire lives. Your negative thinking isn't a character flaw. It's not evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with you. It's a signal, a message from the deepest parts of your mind, trying to communicate with you in the only language it knows. And that language was learned a long time ago, in circumstances you've probably forgotten, by a version of you that no longer exists. You see, I've worked with hundreds of people over my career, brilliant people, successful people, people who, by any external measure, should be happy. And yet they came to me exhausted from the constant warfare happening inside their own minds. They'd wake up and immediately the voice would start. "You're going to fail today. Everyone will see through you. You're not as smart as they think. You're going to disappoint them." And they'd spend the entire day trying to outrun that voice, trying to prove it wrong, trying to silence it with achievement or distraction or sheer force of will. And here's what broke my heart. They all thought they were alone. They all believed that everyone else had peaceful minds and that they were the only ones struggling. They'd look around and see people smiling, succeeding, seemingly at ease. And they'd think, "What's wrong with me? Why can't I just be positive like them?" But what they didn't see was that those other people were fighting the exact same battle. just behind closed doors, in the privacy of their own consciousness. The pain you're experiencing right now, this very moment, as you listen to me, the frustration of knowing you shouldn't think so negatively, but being unable to stop that pain is universal. It's the human condition. And the reason you haven't been able to fix it isn't because you're weak or broken or deficient. It's because you've been trying to solve the wrong problem. Every technique you've tried, every book you've read that told you to just think positive, or choose better thoughts, or practice gratitude, they all made the same mistake. They treated negative thinking as the problem itself, when it's actually a symptom. It's like taking aspirin for a headache that's caused by dehydration. The aspirin might dull the pain temporarily, but it's not addressing what's actually happening beneath the surface. What I'm going to show you is radically different. We're not going to fight your negative thoughts. We're not going to try to replace them with affirmations that feel fake and hollow. We're not going to pretend that you can simply choose to think differently, as if decades of conditioning can be overridden by willpower alone. Instead, we're going to go deeper. We're going to go to the source. We're going to understand where these thoughts came from, what purpose they serve, and why they've had such power over you for so long. And when you understand this, truly understand it at a deep level, something remarkable happens. The thoughts don't necessarily disappear, but their grip on you loosens. You stop believing them automatically. You start to see them for what they are. Old recordings, playing on a loop, trying to protect a version of you that no longer needs that particular kind of protection. Right now, you're probably spending most of your mental energy in one of two states. Either you're lost in the negative thoughts, believing them, letting them dictate your mood and your decisions and your sense of self-worth, or you're fighting them, trying to push them away, trying to think differently, exhausting yourself with positive affirmations that feel like lies you're telling yourself. Both of these states are forms of slavery. In the first, you're enslaved to the thoughts themselves. In the second, you're enslaved to the war against them. What I'm offering you is a third option, a way of relating to your thoughts that doesn't require you to believe them or fight them, a way of understanding that frees you from both forms of bondage. And this freedom, this is what changes everything. Because when you're no longer controlled by your thoughts, when you can observe them with curiosity instead of fear, when you understand their origins and their purpose, you discover something extraordinary. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that notices them. And that awareness has always been free, even when you forgot it was there. So here's what we're going to do together. First, I'm going to share some stories with you. Stories from my own life and from my work. Stories that will help you see your own patterns reflected back to you. Then, we're going to explore the deeper lessons, the principles that govern how the unconscious mind works and why it creates the thought patterns it does. And finally, I'm going to give you practical tools, simple practices you can start using today to transform your relationship with your own thinking. But I need you to approach this with an open mind. Some of what I'm going to tell you might challenge beliefs you've held for years. Some of it might make you uncomfortable. That discomfort is a sign that we're touching something real, something that's been hidden in the shadows of your consciousness. Don't run from it. Stay with me, because on the other side of that discomfort is the freedom you've been seeking your entire life. Let me start by telling you about a dream that changed everything for me. Early in my career, when I was still developing my theories about the unconscious, I was plagued by a recurring nightmare. In the dream, I was being chased through dark corridors by a shadowy figure. I'd run and run, my heart pounding, terror flooding my body, sweat on my palms, but I could never escape. The figure was always just behind me, and I'd wake up in a cold sweat, ashamed of my own cowardice. Why couldn't I turn and face this pursuer? Why was I always running like a frightened child? For months, I accepted this dream at face value. I thought it meant I was afraid, that somewhere deep down I was a coward. And this thought haunted me during my waking hours. Every time I faced a challenge, a difficult patient, a professional disagreement, a moment where I needed to stand up for my ideas, the dream would whisper, "You're going to run. You always run. You're not brave enough." It became a core belief about myself, a negative thought that colored everything I did. But then I decided to analyze the dream the way I would analyze a patient's dream. I sat with it. I wrote it down in detail. I explored every element, every feeling, every symbol. And what I discovered shocked me. The figure chasing me wasn't an enemy at all. It was a part of myself I'd rejected. It was my anger, my ambition, my sexuality, my competitive drive, all the parts of myself I'd been taught were inappropriate or dangerous or shameful. I wasn't running from an external threat. I was running from myself. You see, I'd been raised in a certain environment with certain values. I'd learned that some parts of human nature were acceptable and some were not. The civilized man was supposed to be rational, controlled, measured. He wasn't supposed to have raw desires or aggressive impulses or selfish wants. So I'd taken all those parts of myself and pushed them away, declared them unacceptable, tried to pretend they didn't exist. But they did exist, and they were chasing me through my dreams, trying to get my attention, trying to be acknowledged and integrated. The dream wasn't showing me that I was a coward. It was showing me that I was in conflict with myself, that I'd split off essential parts of my own nature and declared them unacceptable. And as long as I kept running, as long as I kept rejecting these parts, they would chase me through my dreams and through my thoughts. The negative thinking, "I'm a coward, I'm weak," was actually a defense mechanism, a way of avoiding the deeper truth. I was afraid of my own power, my own desires, my own completeness. When I finally turned and faced the shadow in my dream, when I stopped running and looked at what was chasing me, everything changed, not just in my dreams, but in my waking life. The negative thoughts about my cowardice dissolved because I understood what they were really pointing to. They weren't truths about my character. They were symptoms of an internal split that needed healing. This is what I want you to understand. Your negative thoughts are trying to tell you something, but they're speaking in code. The unconscious mind doesn't communicate in clear, rational language. It speaks in symbols, in feelings, in repeated patterns. And if you only listen to the surface content of your thoughts, "I'm not good enough, I'm going to fail, nobody likes me," you'll miss the deeper message underneath. Let me tell you about another person who came to see me. A businessman, very successful by conventional standards. He had a thriving company, a beautiful home, a family, but he was completely consumed by anxiety. He couldn't sleep because his mind was flooded with catastrophic thoughts about his business failing. He'd lie awake imagining losing everything, being humiliated, ending up destitute. These thoughts were so vivid, so constant, that he could barely function. He came to me desperate, his hands shaking, asking, "How do I make these thoughts stop? I've tried everything. I've tried positive thinking. I've tried distracting myself. Nothing works." We began to explore his history, and what emerged was fascinating. When he was 7 years old, his father's business had gone bankrupt. He remembered watching his father's despair, his mother's tears, the fear that permeated their home. He remembered the day his father came home and told the family they were losing the house. He remembered neighbors whispering, the shame in his father's eyes, the way his father seemed to shrink, to become smaller, to lose something essential about himself. He remembered the way everything felt uncertain and dangerous for years after that. Now, 40 years later, this man's own business was thriving. He was more successful than his father had ever been, but his unconscious mind didn't know that. As far as his unconscious was concerned, he was still that 7-year-old boy watching his world collapse, learning the lesson: success is temporary. Catastrophe is always waiting around the corner. You must be vigilant. You must worry. Worry keeps you safe. Worry means you won't be caught off guard like your father was. His negative thoughts weren't predictions about the future. They were memories of the past, projected forward. He wasn't thinking negatively about his current reality. He was re-experiencing his childhood trauma and mistaking it for present-day insight. The voice telling him he was going to fail wasn't his adult voice at all. It was his child self's voice, still trying to prepare him for a disaster that had already happened decades ago. When he finally saw this, when he recognized that the voice wasn't giving him accurate information about his present circumstances, but was instead repeating an old story, his entire relationship to those thoughts transformed. They still appeared sometimes. The mind doesn't just erase decades of conditioning overnight. But now, when the thought arose, "Your business is going to fail," he could respond differently. He could say, "Oh, there's that old fear again. That's my 7-year-old self, still scared about what happened to Dad. But I'm not my father. This isn't that situation. I have different skills, different circumstances, different resources. I'm safe." Do you see the difference? He wasn't fighting the thought or trying to replace it with forced positivity. He was simply recognizing its origin, understanding its purpose, and choosing not to take it as literal truth about his present moment. This is the power of awareness. This is what happens when you bring unconscious material into the light of consciousness. Now, here's something that will probably surprise you. Every harsh inner critic, every voice that tells you you're not good enough, every negative thought that seems so cruel and unrelenting, it all started as an attempt to protect you. I know that sounds impossible. How could something that causes you so much pain be protective? But stay with me, because this is crucial. Imagine a child who grows up with a parent who's unpredictable, sometimes loving, sometimes critical, never consistent. Sometimes that parent comes home happy and playful. Other times, for reasons the child can't understand or predict, that parent is cold, harsh, punishing. That child lives in a state of constant anxiety, never knowing which version of the parent they'll encounter. It's terrifying. The child has no control, no way to predict or manage the situation. They are completely at the mercy of forces they don't understand. So the child's mind, in its wisdom, develops a strategy. If I criticize myself first, if I point out all my flaws before they do, maybe I can avoid their criticism. Maybe I can control the situation. Maybe I can stay safe. The child becomes hypervigilant, constantly scanning for their own mistakes, anticipating criticism before it comes, trying to perfect themselves so they won't be vulnerable to the parent's unpredictable anger or disappointment. And it works, in a way. Or at least, it feels like it works. The child learns to scan constantly for their own mistakes, to judge themselves harshly, to never let their guard down, to never feel proud or confident, because pride comes before a fall. This becomes their survival strategy. It becomes automatic, unconscious, invisible. And as that child grows into an adult, this strategy persists. Even when the threatening parent is long gone, even when the circumstances have completely changed, even when they're surrounded by people who love them unconditionally, the inner critic keeps doing its job. It keeps criticizing, keeps finding flaws, keeps maintaining constant vigilance. From the outside, this looks like negative thinking, like self-sabotage, like an enemy within. But from the inside, from the perspective of that child self who's still operating the controls, it's protection, it's love, in a distorted form. That harsh voice is saying, "I won't let you be surprised by criticism. I won't let you be blindsided by rejection. I'll keep you safe by keeping you small, by making sure you never take risks, by ensuring you never disappoint anyone because you never try anything that matters. This is why fighting your negative thoughts doesn't work. You're not fighting an enemy. You're fighting a frightened part of yourself that's trying to protect you, using the only tools it has, tools it developed when you were young and vulnerable and had limited options. To fight this part is to split yourself, to go to war with yourself. And in that war, there are no winners. There's only exhaustion and defeat. The alternative is integration, understanding, compassion. When that critical voice arises, instead of pushing it away or believing it completely, you can turn toward it with curiosity. You can ask it, "What are you afraid will happen if you stop criticizing me? What are you trying to protect me from?" And if you listen, really listen, with genuine curiosity rather than judgment, you'll hear the answer. You'll hear the fear underneath the criticism. You'll hear the child who learned that vigilance equals safety, that perfection equals love, that never being vulnerable means never being hurt. And once you hear that, once you understand that your harshest inner critic is actually a scared guardian doing its best with outdated information, everything changes. You can speak to that part of yourself with kindness. You can say, "Thank you for trying to protect me all these years. I know you learned this was the way to keep me safe. I know you've been working so hard, never resting, always vigilant. But I'm an adult now. The circumstances have changed. I have resources now that I didn't have then. I can handle criticism without being destroyed by it. I can take risks without catastrophe. It's okay to relax your guard. I've got this." This brings me to one of the most important concepts I want you to understand. Repetition, compulsion. The unconscious mind has a strange habit. It repeats what it hasn't resolved. Whatever remained incomplete in your childhood, whatever emotions you couldn't fully feel or experiences you couldn't fully process, your unconscious will create situations in your present life that echo those original experiences. Not because it's sadistic or trying to torture you, but because it's trying to give you another chance to complete what was left unfinished. This is why you might find yourself repeatedly in the same type of relationship, even though you swore you'd never date someone like that again. This is why the same conflicts arise at different jobs with different people. This is why certain thoughts keep coming back no matter how many times you try to banish them. The unconscious is saying, "Look here, pay attention. There's something unresolved. Let's try again. Maybe this time you'll see what needs to be seen, feel what needs to be felt, complete what needs to be completed." Your negative thought patterns are part of this repetition. Every time that familiar thought arises, "I'm going to fail. Nobody really likes me. I'm not smart enough." It's not random. It's connected to an original wound, an original experience where you learned to think this way. And it keeps repeating because the unconscious is trying to bring your attention back to that wound so it can finally heal. But here's what usually happens instead. The thought arises. You believe it's true. You feel bad. Maybe you self-sabotage in some way that confirms the thought. And then the pattern is reinforced. You think, "See, I was right to think negatively. I did fail. I'm not good enough." And the pattern strengthens. The loop closes. The repetition continues, year after year, decade after decade. Breaking this cycle requires something radical. You have to stop taking the thoughts at face value. You have to start asking different questions. Not, "Is this thought true?" but "Where did I learn to think this way? What's the original experience this thought is connected to? What part of me is trying to get my attention? What's trying to be completed here?" Let me give you a concrete example. Suppose you have a persistent negative thought. "People only pretend to like me. If they really knew me, they'd reject me." This thought might feel absolutely true. You might have all kinds of evidence for at times people seemed fake, relationships that ended badly, moments of feeling excluded or misunderstood, but that evidence is selective. Your mind is looking for confirmation of a belief it already holds, filtering out anything that contradicts it. So, instead of arguing with the thought or gathering counter-evidence, try this. Close your eyes and ask yourself, when is the first time I remember feeling this way? Let your mind drift back. Don't force it. Just stay open and curious. And often, what will emerge is a memory. Maybe you're 8 years old, excited to show your parents a drawing you made at school. You're so proud of it. You worked on it for hours. You rush home to show them, and one of them barely glances at it before returning to their newspaper or their phone. Maybe they say, "That's nice, dear," in a distracted voice that makes it clear they're not really seeing it, not really seeing you. In that moment, the child you forms a belief. My real self, my creative self, my enthusiastic self isn't interesting to them. They only like me when I'm quiet and convenient. That belief gets stored in the unconscious. It becomes a lens through which you interpret all future relationships. It becomes a filter through which all new experiences must pass. And 40 years later, when a friend seems distracted during your conversation, you don't think, they're probably stressed about something in their own life. You think, see, they don't really care about me, they're just being polite. I knew it. The negative thought isn't about the present moment. It's about that moment with the newspaper, still unresolved, still waiting for completion. Now, here's what's powerful about this understanding. Once you see the connection, once you trace the negative thought back to its origin, something loosens. The thought still might appear, but you're no longer entirely convinced by it. You can say, "Oh, there's that old belief again. That's my 8-year-old self, still hurt about the drawing that wasn't appreciated. But this current situation is different. This friend is not my distracted parent. They have their own life, their own concerns. Their distraction doesn't mean I'm fundamentally unlovable or uninteresting. I don't have to interpret their distraction as rejection of my essential self." This is what I mean when I say awareness itself heals. You don't have to do anything elaborate. You don't have to fix or change or improve yourself. You just have to see clearly. And in that seeing, in that clear recognition of what's actually happening versus what your conditioning is telling you is happening, you find freedom. Let me talk now about something I call the shadow. This is one of my most important discoveries, and understanding it will transform how you see your negative thinking. The shadow is all the parts of yourself you've rejected, denied, or pushed away. It's everything you decided was unacceptable about yourself. Your anger, your selfishness, your laziness, your sexuality, your neediness, your aggression, your pettiness, whatever it is that doesn't fit your image of who you should be. And here's the crucial thing that most people don't understand. Those parts don't disappear when you reject them. They don't just vanish into thin air. They just go underground. They become unconscious. They enter the shadow. And from there, hidden from your awareness, they run your life in ways you don't see, creating the very problems you're trying to avoid. One of the most common forms this takes is projection. You see in others what you can't acknowledge in yourself. If you've rejected your own anger and decided you're not an angry person, you'll be hypersensitive to anger in others. You'll see it everywhere. People will seem unreasonably angry to you all the time. You'll be constantly bothered by aggressive drivers, irritable co-workers, hostile strangers, and you won't realize that what you're actually seeing is your own disowned anger, projected outward onto the world. And this creates a specific kind of negative thinking. You'll think, everyone's so angry. The world is full of hostile people. I can't trust anyone. People are dangerous. But the thought isn't about the world. It's about what you've split off from yourself. It's about the anger you couldn't accept, the rage you had to suppress, now appearing in your external experience because it has to go somewhere. Energy doesn't disappear, it just transforms. The same pattern applies to whatever you've rejected about yourself. If you've disowned your neediness, if you've decided you must always be independent and self-sufficient, you'll be extremely bothered by needy people. You'll judge them harshly. You'll have negative thoughts about people who ask for help or express vulnerability. If you've rejected your own ambition, if you've decided that wanting success is selfish or wrong, you'll judge ambitious people harshly. You'll see them as greedy or shallow or missing what really matters. And in each case, you'll have negative thoughts about them that are actually reflecting disowned parts of yourself. The world becomes a mirror for your shadow, showing you everything you refuse to see in yourself. And then you wonder why you're so negative, why you're so judgmental, why you see problems everywhere. It's because you're at war with yourself, and that internal war manifests as external conflict. The solution isn't to become angry or needy or ambitious if those things aren't authentic to you. The solution is to acknowledge that you have the capacity for these qualities, that they're part of the full spectrum of human experience, and that having them doesn't make you bad or wrong or unacceptable. The solution is integration, welcoming back the exiled parts of yourself, acknowledging that they exist, that they're part of you, that they might even have something valuable to offer. When you integrate your shadow, when you acknowledge and accept all the parts of yourself, even the parts that don't fit your preferred self-image, something remarkable happens to your negative thinking. It loses much of its power because it's no longer being fueled by internal conflict. You're no longer at war with yourself, which means your thoughts no longer have to defend against internal enemies. The energy that was going into repression and projection becomes available for creativity, for genuine connection, for living fully. Let me explain some of the other mechanisms the mind uses to defend against painful truths. Understanding these will help you recognize when your negative thinking is actually a defense mechanism rather than an accurate assessment of reality. The first is denial, simply refusing to see what's there. If acknowledging something would threaten your sense of identity or safety, your mind might just block it out entirely. You might have persistent negative thoughts about one area of your life while being completely blind to problems in another area that's actually more significant. I had a patient once who spent every session complaining about his job, having intensely negative thoughts about his boss, his co-workers, his responsibilities. But he never mentioned his marriage, which was clearly in crisis. When I gently brought it up, he looked genuinely confused. "My marriage is fine," he said. "It's work that's the problem." But his marriage wasn't fine. His wife was deeply unhappy. They barely spoke. They lived like roommates. But acknowledging that would have been too threatening, so his mind redirected all the negative thinking onto work, where it felt safer. The second defense mechanism is rationalization, creating logical-sounding explanations for feelings or behaviors that actually have emotional roots. I'm not staying in this unfulfilling job because I'm afraid of change. I'm staying because it's the responsible thing to do. I have bills to pay. I have a family to support. And then you have negative thoughts about how trapped you feel, without seeing that the trap is self-created, that the real issue is fear masquerading as responsibility. The third is displacement, taking feelings meant for one person or situation and directing them at another, safer target. Maybe you're angry at your boss but can't express it because you need the job, so you come home and have negative thoughts about your partner, picking fights over small things, feeling irritated by habits that never bothered you before. The negative thinking isn't really about your partner. It's displaced anger looking for an outlet, finding a target that feels safer than the real source. Understanding these mechanisms helps you see that your negative thoughts are often not what they appear to be. They're not direct reflections of reality. They're indirect expressions of unconscious conflicts, unmet needs, disowned feelings, or unresolved wounds. And once you understand this, you can start to decode them rather than being controlled by them. You can ask, what's really happening here? What am I really upset about? What am I defending against? What am I not willing to see? Now, let me give you some practical tools. These are simple practices, but don't mistake simplicity for lack of power. Sometimes the simplest interventions are the most profound because they cut through complexity and get straight to the heart of what needs to change. The first practice I want you to try is what I call the daily thought inventory. Every evening, before you go to sleep, write down the 3 most persistent negative thoughts you had that day. Don't judge them. Don't try to change them. Don't explain them or rationalize them. Just write them down exactly as they appeared in your mind. I'm not good enough at my job. I'm going to end up alone. I'm a failure. I'm too old to change. Nobody takes me seriously. Whatever they were, write them down. Then, for each thought, ask yourself one question. How old was I when I first learned to think this way? And sit with that question. Don't force an answer. Don't make something up if nothing comes. Just let your mind drift back through your history, through your memories. Often, after a few moments, a memory will surface. Maybe you're remembering a report card that disappointed your father. Maybe you're remembering being picked last for a team in gym class. Maybe you're remembering your mother's anxiety about being alone after your father left. Maybe you're remembering a teacher who made you feel stupid when you asked a question. The goal isn't necessarily to find the definitive origin, the single moment where the thought was born, though sometimes you will. The goal is to begin creating distance between your current self and the thought. When you recognize that the thought has a history, that it came from somewhere, that it's connected to a younger version of you in a different circumstance, it becomes less absolute. It becomes one perspective among many, a remnant from the past rather than the capital T, truth about who you are. Do this every night for 2 weeks. Just 2 weeks. Write down 3 thoughts. Ask where they came from. Notice what emerges. I promise you, you'll start to see patterns you've been blind to your entire life. You'll start to recognize the themes, the recurring situations, the old wounds that are still shaping your present experience. And that recognition, that awareness, is the beginning of freedom. You can't change what you can't see, but once you see it, once you really see it clearly, change becomes possible. The second practice is what I call dialogue with the critic. When a particularly harsh negative thought appears, and you'll know it because you'll feel the sting of it, the way it lands in your chest or your stomach, the way it makes you feel small or ashamed or defeated, stop what you're doing. Take out a piece of paper or open a note on your phone and write down the thought at the top of the page. Write it in the exact words it appeared in your mind. Then, underneath it, write this question. What are you afraid will happen if you go quiet? And write whatever answer comes, in the voice of the critic itself. Don't filter it. Don't make it rational or polite. Just let the critic respond in its own voice. It might say something like, if I go quiet, you'll get lazy. You'll stop trying. You'll fail, and everyone will see what you really are. Mediocre, average, nothing special. You'll disappoint everyone who believed in you. You'll waste your potential. You'll end up with nothing. Then respond to that answer. As your adult self, speak to the critic. Thank you for trying to protect me from laziness and failure. I know you think constant criticism keeps me motivated. I know you've been working tirelessly to keep me safe. But actually, you're exhausting me. Your criticism doesn't motivate me, it paralyzes me. It makes me afraid to try anything because I know you'll be there to point out every flaw. What if we tried something different? What if we trusted that I can be motivated by interest and purpose and genuine desire rather than fear and shame? Keep this dialogue going. Let the critic express its fears. Let it tell you why it thinks it needs to be harsh. Let your adult self respond with understanding and offer alternative perspectives. What you'll discover is that the critic isn't monolithic. It's not an enemy. It's a part of you that's stuck in an old pattern, and it's capable of evolving if you engage with it compassionately rather than fighting it or surrendering to it completely. Sometimes the critic will soften. Sometimes it will reveal that it's exhausted too, that it doesn't want to keep doing this job, that it's just scared of what will happen if it stops. And in those moments, you can offer it a different role. You can say, I still need your discernment. I still need you to help me see clearly. But instead of attacking me for every mistake, what if you helped me learn from them? What if you supported me in taking risks instead of keeping me paralyzed by fear? The third practice is to use your symptoms as teachers. When your negative thinking intensifies, when you notice you're spiraling, when the thoughts are coming faster and harder than usual, when you wake up and the voice is already attacking you before you've even gotten out of bed, that's not a sign that something's wrong with you. It's not evidence that you're failing or backsliding. It's a signal. It's your unconscious trying to get your attention about something important. Stop and ask yourself, what situation am I in right now that resembles something from my past? Maybe you're about to give a presentation at work and you're flooded with thoughts about humiliating yourself, about everyone seeing that you don't know what you're talking about. What does this situation remind you of? When have you felt this fear before? Maybe there's a memory of being called on in class and not knowing the answer, of everyone staring at you, of the teacher's disappointment or the other kid's laughter. Maybe you're in a new relationship and suddenly convinced it's going to end badly, convinced this person will eventually see the real you and leave. When did you first feel this fear? Maybe there's a memory of abandonment, of someone you loved leaving, of learning that love is conditional and temporary. The unconscious doesn't operate in linear time. It doesn't distinguish between past and present the way your conscious mind does. When something in your present life resembles something from your past, the unconscious reacts as if you're back in that original situation. Your negative thoughts spike because your unconscious is saying, "Warning, we've been here before. This is dangerous. Remember what happened last time." But when you can recognize this, when you can say, "Oh, this presentation is triggering that memory of the time I forgot my lines in the school play," or "this new relationship is triggering my old abandonment wound," you can separate past from present. You can remind yourself that you're not that child anymore. You have different skills. Now, different resources, different circumstances. The thought is a memory dressed up as a prophecy. It's an echo, not a prediction. This practice transforms your relationship with your symptoms. Instead of seeing intensified negative thinking as evidence that you're broken or backsliding, you start to see it as information. Your unconscious is pointing you towards something that needs attention, something that wants to be healed. The symptom becomes a teacher rather than an enemy. The pain becomes a messenger rather than a punishment. And here's something beautiful that happens when you start working with your symptoms this way. You begin to trust yourself. You begin to trust that your psyche is intelligent, that it's always trying to move toward wholeness, that even the most painful symptoms are attempts at healing. Nothing in the unconscious is random. Nothing is without meaning. Every symptom, every thought pattern, every behavior is communicating something important if you know how to listen. Now, I want to address something important, something you need to understand clearly. Everything I'm telling you isn't going to make your negative thoughts instantly disappear. That's not the goal. And frankly, it's not possible. Decades of conditioning don't unravel in a day or a week or even a month. The neural pathways in your brain have been carved deep by repetition. The beliefs you hold have been reinforced thousands of times. This isn't something you can just will away or think your way out of. What changes, and changes fairly quickly if you're sincere in this work, is your relationship to those thoughts. The thoughts still arise. They might even arise with the same frequency at first. But you're less convinced by them. You see them more clearly for what they are: old patterns, protective mechanisms, echoes of past experiences, messages from younger versions of yourself. And in that seeing, in that clarity, they lose their grip. They become less convincing. Over time, less intense, less able to dictate your emotional state and your behavior. But the freedom you're seeking isn't about having a perfectly quiet mind. It's not about achieving some state where negative thoughts never appear. That's a fantasy, and chasing that fantasy will only lead to more suffering, more self-judgment, more feeling like you're failing. The freedom is about not being controlled by the noise. It's about being able to observe your thoughts without being swept away by them. It's about recognizing that you have a choice in how you respond, even when you don't have a choice in what thoughts appear. Let me tell you what this looks like in practice, what it looks like when you're actually living it day to day. You're going about your morning and a negative thought arises. You're going to mess this up. In your old relationship to this thought, you'd either believe it completely and feel anxious and defeated, your whole body tensing up, your confidence draining away. Or you'd fight it, trying to convince yourself you're not going to mess up, exhausting yourself with mental arguments, creating positive affirmations that feel hollow and fake. In your new relationship to the thought, something different happens. The thought arises, and there's a moment, just a brief moment where you notice it. You see it. Oh, there's that thought again. You're not lost in it. You're not fused with it. You're aware of it. And in that awareness, you have a choice. You can explore it. Where's that coming from? What's this really about? Is this my anxious child self speaking? Or you can simply let it pass. That's an old fear. It's not relevant to this particular situation right now. Or you can speak to it. I know you're trying to help, trying to keep me from failing. But I've got this. I'm prepared. And even if I do make mistakes, I can handle them. This might sound like a small change, but it's actually revolutionary. It's the difference between being a character in a story and being the author of the story. It's the difference between being at the mercy of your conditioning and being in conscious relationship with it. It's the difference between slavery and freedom. And here's what happens over time with this practice. The thoughts still come, but they lose their emotional charge. They become more like background noise than urgent messages. They become less sticky, less able to capture your full attention and hold it hostage. And eventually, you start to notice something wonderful. There are moments, maybe brief at first, but they grow where your mind is quiet. Not because you've forced it to be quiet, not because you're white-knuckling your way through meditation or repeating affirmations, but because the unconscious patterns have loosened their grip. The repetition compulsion has relaxed because you've brought awareness to what was unconscious. This is the talking cure. This is what I discovered over years of painstaking work with patients and with myself, that bringing unconscious material into consciousness, simply seeing it clearly, loosens its power over you. You don't have to fix anything. You don't have to improve or heal or become enlightened or transcend your humanity. You just have to see, and the seeing itself is transformative. Light dissolves shadow. Awareness dissolves compulsion. Understanding dissolves the grip of the past. Let me share one more story with you, because I think it illustrates all of this beautifully. There was a young woman who came to see me, a painter, talented and sensitive. She was tormented by negative thoughts about her work. Every time she stood before a canvas, a voice would arise. "This is terrible. You have no talent. You're fooling yourself. Real artists don't struggle like this. The thoughts were so painful that she'd stopped painting entirely. She came to me in despair, convinced she'd never create again. We explored her history. Her father had been an artist, a successful one, and he'd had very specific ideas about what constituted real art. When she was young, she'd show him her drawings, desperate for his approval. Sometimes he'd praise her, but more often, he'd critique her work harshly, pointing out flaws, comparing her unfavorably to other artists, telling her she needed to work harder, be more disciplined, take it more seriously. She'd internalized his voice completely. It had become her inner critic, and it was destroying her ability to create. But here's what she discovered through our work. That critical voice wasn't actually trying to destroy her. It was trying to earn her father's love. It was still that little girl, showing her drawings to her father, desperate for approval, believing that if she could just be perfect enough, critical enough of herself, good enough, he would finally see her and love her unconditionally. Once she understood this, everything shifted. When the critical voice arose, she could recognize it for what it was. She could say, "There's that voice again, still trying to earn Dad's approval. But I don't need his approval anymore. I'm painting for myself now, for the joy of it, for the expression of it. The work doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be mine." The critical voice didn't disappear immediately, but it lost its power. She could hear it and choose not to believe it. She could thank it for trying to protect her and then return to her canvas. And slowly, over weeks and months, the voice grew quieter. Not silent, but quieter, and her joy in creating returned. This is what I'm offering you. Not the elimination of negative thinking, but liberation from its tyranny. Not a perfectly peaceful mind, but a mind you can work with, a mind you understand, a mind that no longer controls you even when it's noisy. Let me bring all of this together now. Let me give you the core insight that everything else flows from. Your negative thoughts aren't evidence of failure. They're not proof that you're broken or weak or fundamentally flawed. They're evidence of your unconscious mind's loyalty to your younger self. They're evidence that your psyche developed protective mechanisms in circumstances where those mechanisms made sense, where they perhaps even saved you from overwhelming pain or danger. But you're no longer that child in that circumstance. You're an adult with resources and capacities and options that weren't available to you then. You have awareness now. You have the ability to reflect, to see patterns, to understand origins. You have relationships and support and knowledge that your younger self didn't have. The work isn't to eliminate negative thinking. That's a fool's errand. The work is to update your mind's understanding of who you are now and what you need now. The work is to recognize that you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that observes them. You are the consciousness that contains them, the space in which they arise and pass away. And in that awareness, in that space between the thought and your response to it, you find your freedom. That space might be tiny at first, just a flicker of recognition before you're swept back into the stream of thinking. But with practice, that space grows. And in that space, you can choose. Not what to think, that's still largely automatic, shaped by years of conditioning and unconscious patterns, but how to relate to what you think. You can choose curiosity over belief. You can choose compassion over judgment. You can choose to investigate rather than react. And those choices, accumulated over time, change everything. They change your relationship with yourself, with others, with life itself. I want you to imagine something. Imagine waking up tomorrow and a negative thought arising, as it probably will. But this time, instead of believing it or fighting it, you simply notice it. Interesting, you think? There's that thought again. And you remember what I've told you. You remember that this thought has a history, that it's connected to something old, that it's trying to protect you in an outdated way. And you feel compassion for that younger part of yourself that's still scared, still vigilant, still trying to keep you safe. And then you make a choice. You choose to move forward with your day anyway. Not because you've defeated the thought or replaced it with positivity, but because you understand that the thought is just a thought, not a command, not a prophecy, not the truth, just a mental event, arising and passing away like clouds in the sky of your consciousness. Now imagine doing this day after day. Each time a negative thought arises, you notice it, you understand it, you choose how to respond to it. Some days you'll do this well. Other days you'll get lost in the thoughts again, caught up in old patterns. That's okay, that's normal. That's part of being human. But over time, the practice accumulates. The awareness deepens, the space between stimulus and response widens, and your life begins to change in ways you can't quite predict or control, but that feel like coming home to yourself. This is what I want for you. This is what all of this work is pointing toward. Not perfection, not the elimination of struggle, not some enlightened state where everything is peaceful and easy, but a kind of freedom within the struggle. A way of being with yourself that's compassionate and curious rather than judgmental and harsh. A relationship with your own mind that allows for the full range of human experience without being destroyed by it. I want to leave you with a mantra, something simple you can return to whenever you notice you're caught in negative thinking. It's this: I am not my thoughts, I am the one who notices them. And in that space between the thought and my response to it, I find my freedom. Say this to yourself, not as a magical incantation that will make everything better, not as another form of positive thinking that you don't really believe, but as a reminder of the truth. You are not the voice in your head. You are the awareness that hears the voice. The voice might be loud, it might be persistent, it might be convincing, it might sound exactly like you, might feel like you, might seem to be you, but it's still just a voice, and you don't have to believe everything it says. You don't have to obey every command it gives. You don't have to let it determine your mood, your choices, your sense of who you are. Your negative thoughts don't mean you're broken. They mean you're human, with a history, with wounds and protective mechanisms and patterns that made sense once upon a time. They mean you're alive, navigating a complex internal world that most people never take the time to understand. They mean you have an unconscious mind that's trying to communicate with you, protect you, complete old patterns, bring your attention to what needs healing. The fact that you're here, listening to this, wanting to change, wanting to understand that itself is the beginning of transformation. Most people go their whole lives without ever questioning their thoughts, without ever looking beneath the surface of their consciousness. They remain slaves to their conditioning, puppets dancing on strings they can't see. But you're different. You're here. You're listening. You're willing to look at what's uncomfortable, to question what you've always assumed was true, to do the hard work of bringing the unconscious into consciousness. Be patient with yourself. The unconscious reveals itself slowly, and only to those who approach it with compassion and curiosity rather than judgment and force. You spent years, maybe decades, developing these patterns of thought. They won't unravel overnight, but they will unravel layer by layer if you stay with this work, if you keep asking the questions, if you keep bringing awareness to what's been unconscious, if you keep choosing understanding over fighting, integration over rejection, compassion over criticism. And one day, maybe not tomorrow, or next week, or next month, but one day, you'll notice something remarkable. A negative thought will arise, and you'll see it clearly for what it is, and it will have no power over you whatsoever. It will be like watching a cloud pass through the sky there, observable, part of the weather of your consciousness, but not defining your experience, not controlling you, not convincing you. just there, and then gone. And in that moment, you'll understand what I've been trying to tell you throughout this entire conversation. You were never trapped by your thoughts. You were only trapped by your belief in them. And now you're free, not because the thoughts disappeared, but because you learned to see them clearly, to understand their origins, to relate to them with wisdom rather than fear. This freedom is your birthright. It's not something you have to earn through years of therapy or meditation or self-improvement. It's already there, waiting for you. The moment you stop fighting and start seeing, the moment you stop believing and start noticing, the moment you remember that you are not the voice, but the awareness that hears it. So go forward from here with this understanding. When the negative thoughts arise, and they will, meet them with curiosity. Ask where they came from. Understand what they're trying to protect you from. Speak to them with kindness. Thank them for their efforts, and gently show them that you're okay, that you have this, that they can rest now. And remember, you are not alone in this struggle. Every human being who has ever lived has battled with their own mind, has struggled with negative thinking, has felt the weight of old wounds and outdated patterns. This is not a sign of your individual failure. It's a sign of your membership in the human family. We all carry these burdens. We all have these battles. The only difference is that some of us have learned to see clearly, to understand deeply, to relate differently. And now you're learning too. If this conversation resonated with you, please subscribe to continue this journey together. Leave a like if you found value here. And I genuinely love to read your thoughts in the comments. Share one negative thought pattern you recognized in yourself, or one insight that landed for you. Tell me what you're struggling with, what you're discovering, what you're learning about your own mind. Because we're all in this together, all of us trying to understand ourselves, trying to be free, trying to live with more awareness and less suffering. Thank you for trusting me with your time and attention. Thank you for doing this difficult work. The world needs more people who are willing to look inward, to understand themselves, to break free from unconscious patterns. By doing this work, you're not just helping yourself, you're helping everyone you encounter. Because freedom is contagious. When you're no longer controlled by your thoughts, you create space for others to find their own freedom too. So go forward with courage, with compassion, with curiosity. And remember, you are not your thoughts. You are so much more than that.